Welcome to the #1 marketing podcast in the world. This is the HasMedia podcast. I'm owner Has.
And I'm Wilcon Haas.
And we got a very special guest for you guys today. It is our first client and friend, Kyle Newell, a.k.a. the PandaMan. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah,
Can't believe we haven't done this yet.
It's kind of nice, though. It's a good build-up.
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
3 years in the making, right?
Yeah. Still the beginning, though. Still a lot Still a lot of growth ahead of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still in the early stages when you look back at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
10, 20 years down the road.
Yeah.
So it's been pretty awesome to watch you guys and work with you guys.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, likewise.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of started with just an iPhone, simple message and just an iPhone. So
yeah,
it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, and it shows you don't need to. A lot of people overcomplicate it when they're trying to get started. You know, where they want to have all the nice stuff that you guys have right away.
Yeah.
And then it never gets started.
Yeah. I feel like with that aspect too, it's like I noticed that with everything. Like whatever, I guess, like venture I'm trying to start out or something creative or something I'm trying to get out there, there's always that mental block. You know what I mean? And I feel like a lot of people experience, they're waiting for all the lights to turn green, and it's just start today. Just do the first thing you need to do and you're on your way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a key principle. Something I learned from Dan Kennedy was good is good enough. Just put it out there and then make adjustments. Put it out there, make adjustments.
Yeah. 100%. Because a lot of people don't know that, you're the famous PandaMan now, but if you scroll through Kyle's YouTube and Facebook, it's almost 13, 14 years in the making?
Yeah. Yeah, I think YouTube, was doing that as far as social media before Facebook, at least 2011 or 12. If you go back to the first videos, just with that little flip camera that had a USB, the USB drive that would come out the side. And, it was the whole concept, just start putting stuff up.
Yeah.
What got you into YouTube? Like, what made you say, I have to be on this platform?
It was, at that time, I would say that was probably the biggest platform, and it still is in a lot of ways. There's so many other things now, but it was studying the marketing, and I think it was probably in one of the masterminds I was in, where somebody had mentioned it, like, you guys got to be on YouTube, and so right away I'm like, all right, start doing that. So it was that omnipresence type of thing, and at that time too, I don't know what the stats are, but if you go back, not nearly as many people had a YouTube channel.
Oh yeah.
Right, so it was like if you had a YouTube channel, it kind of elevated you, and I was just doing it for my training business.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, oh, they got their own channel.
Yeah.
Right, where anybody could do it. But it was, set the camera up, just click, record, and whatever I was thinking about, whether it was training or mindset, record it, put it up, and then being consistent with that. And, there's a lot of power in that, as far as just becoming an authority figure.
Right.
You put stuff out there.
So when you started, though, did you think that you would end up at this point right now? Or was it more just, I kind of want to just get these videos out. I want to help out.
Yeah. So it's funny because last week, Devin, my wife, was saying, I had on an old, one of the first shirts it was Champion's Choice Personal Training, which was my second logo. And that was going back to like 2009, but I saved the shirt. It's pretty funny. On the back, it has my phone number and says, "Get jacked." And she's like, did you ever think that it would, from your car to your parents' basement, you'd be here? And I said, it's all part of the path, but that wasn't my vision back then.
Right.
It was to be, the best strength coach in the world and to build my local personal training business. That was the focus. It was just using, at that time, the little social media that I had, as far as, again, just being out there. So I was doing that in conjunction with writing a lot of blog posts, I would probably write 3 to 5 a week,
Yeah.
putting them out there, and then I would submit those to, various websites like EliteFTS, bodybuilding.com. I would just put stuff out there,
Yeah.
and I would then I would cut and paste it and put it on Facebook.
Did you have any like people reaching out to you like back in the day from it?
Yeah, so it's funny, like the first live seminar, and I haven't done many like that since, where it was like open to anybody. I think it was a 1-day training seminar, and I had people come from Ohio. There was like 12, 13 people there. I just taught them everything I knew about training in that 1 day. So that, and then my first intern, Gabe, who was from Bound Brook, he was a godsend at the time, because when I decided to open the facility after I'd almost given it up a few times because it was just getting burned out.
Mm-hmm.
He showed up at the gym one day when me and my brother Shane were in there just getting it set up. He showed up kind of like unannounced. I think he saw a video I put up.
Mm-hmm.
Said, "Oh, I've been reading your articles on Elite FTS. I want to work with you.
Gotcha.
I want to intern with you."
So you saw the power in it like way earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had one of my first coaching clients that didn't have to do with fitness. CJ, he owns Appenzeller he's down in South Jersey. Same thing. He was reading the article. He read something I put out about injuries. Connected with me.
I like the way that like you frame it though, because I feel like a lot of the times when people are trying to get into the content world or any type of content, right, in marketing, just in general, they think of the end result. Like they think of what they're trying to be in 10 years, or they want that now, and it's hard for them to kind of meet the two together.
Yeah.
You're like, it's interesting because you're like, I just wanted to do it on a local scale. I just wanted to be known locally, and then kind of scale on that, and it worked out.
Yeah.
It took time, but it worked out.
Yeah, it takes time. Again, it wasn't at that time, it wasn't such a thing as like an influencer or whatever.
Right.
It wasn't really a thing. And I think even from the guys that you guys work with, the guys and ladies, they all, had a successful business prior to that. I think a lot of people make that mistake, but they just want to jump into the online world, but they haven't grown their expertise to a point, where it's in demand.
Right.
Yeah.
They haven't built that foundation. It's almost like a lot of people want to skip over to 10,000 hours.
100%. And I think that's like one of the reasons why that it took us a long time to get comfortable on camera, and then we've been on and off, because there's been this effect of we feel that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
But now, being 3 years into it and working with many clients and getting results for clients is finally like, okay, maybe we are experts in this industry. You know what I mean? And it's cool to see, because especially with other clients, we got introduced to Vince through you as well. You guys come from like the same marketing world.
Yeah.
And many people don't think about marketing the way that you guys do, and have mentors like the way that you guys did. How'd you get into the Dan Kennedy and those type of guys? Yeah, Ben Settle, and like what was your first interaction with all that?
Because I was never aware of that as well, and that type of marketing, it's way deeper.
Oh yeah,
it's way deeper. It's not surface level at all. And a lot of people look right past it. It's like so obvious, but they look right past it.
It is. Well, you look at, part of this, everybody's got that individual stack. It was a necessity, because I was like, okay, I want to grow my training business. I had no idea when I started in 2007 how I was going to get anybody. It was just a decision I made to start. So then I was always investing in, info products or seminars, or, taking personal days to go to seminars and just learning. And it was a DVD program or CD program by Zach Evanesh. So Zach, he was kind of like, as far as the garage gym, he was really he was like a pioneer in that.
Okay.
So then he put out this thing with Paul Reddick, who ran one of the first masterminds, those two guys that I was in. It was called HTK, How to Kick Ass. And it was small group. But on one of those CDs, I think Zach had mentioned, okay, Dan Kennedy or Seth Godin. So then I started getting the books, then I subscribed to Dan's newsletter and went to a live event with him, and I just started studying it because it was, again, okay, I need to know this. And then I really started liking it, the marketing, studying the science behind it. It's a science and art. It's still a lot of people view it that have businesses as like it's an event that you market them. It's an ongoing.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah.
I just started noticing that a lot more.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, there's an event that's coming up, so I need to market this event. No, it's the getting them into your world.
Yeah.
It's the things that you wouldn't think about.
Yeah.
That people find the most interesting and actually stick.
Yeah.
Right?
It is. Yeah, and you got to be consistent with it. And if something didn't work, that's where a lot of people, it didn't work. And that's where they have the, it's an event. I tried it, it didn't work. And say, no, you figured out what didn't work.
Right.
Well, you didn't do it long enough.
Yeah.
You didn't stick with it long enough. And then hitting it from multiple angles too, where you have, we're doing the brand building and all that, and then you have the direct response marketing.
100%.
And you're given a heavy dose of yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you probably see it at the gym too with Newell Strength. I mean, I'm sure you guys didn't figure out that, what the messaging was for each type of 6-week challenge that you guys do, and then finally, like, some of them hit, and now you guys are just kind of rotating it when you need to, and not just playing it out and keep going and going and going, right?
Yeah, exactly. You figure out what works, what resonates, and then sometimes you'll run the same thing or similar, and nothing will happen. And it could be, okay, just this isn't the time of the year for that, or whatever. There's certain times in fitness where people have that on their mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have to make a change.
Do you find that it's like kind of universal, like this, like it's almost as if in some seasons people aren't, like, they don't want to work out or they don't want to be more fit or something?
Yeah, I think it goes with the seasons of nature.
Yeah.
Really, it's the winters. You have the New Year's, but that triggers people, but the summers and spring is still a little far away. When they know that, okay, they're going to be outside more, maybe at the pool and beach or wherever they're going on vacation, they start thinking about it more. And then you have the people that they have some type of scare, and that could happen anytime.
Yeah.
But if you keep showing up, you want to be the first person they think of
100%.
when the time is right,
100%.
especially, and they have to resonate with your message and you.
How did you form your messaging? Like that was something that I feel like you built up over time.
Yeah.
And that skill that you built up over time.
Yeah.
Now you have a pretty solid message overall, and you stand for,
Yeah.
you have core values, core beliefs.
Yeah.
When I was gonna actually, that's funny that you brought that up, because I was literally gonna ask the same question, because when I was producing music before we got into any of this, it takes artists like 10, 15 years to create a signature sound, and I feel like you're finally kind of sitting into that signature marketing style that you've curated for the last almost 20 years.
Yeah.
So like walk us through that.
Like your brand,
Yeah.
You really took, like, really sat in that seat.
Yeah, and it was first, getting comfortable with, I think everybody's weird. Most people just hide it,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a flaw that a lot of people have. So it was really embracing that, okay. I always look at it, I was a big introvert, hated going to social events. They would drain me.
Yeah, I was like that as well.
Yeah, I feel out of place. And then finally when it was really within, let's say, around 2020, when I was like, you know what, I'm just going to be who I am, in every situation. If I can sit there by myself and be perfectly fine, where prior to that, right, I was like, all right, I got to try to fit in here. So it was that, and then as far as the marketing message, is keep refining it, knowing what my principles are, what my mission is, and then making the marketing something that I think is cool, or I think that would resonate with me, instead of trying to write it for somebody else.
Right.
The style, everything from, the 80s nostalgia.
That's where the authenticity plays like a big role.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you think about it on, like you said, deeper and deeper levels. If you see an ad copy or something that clicks with you, it's dissect that. What is it about that? If you have the words, but you have the person, the character, you have the style, as far as the visuals.
How do you know you like something? You know what I mean? How do you know if you truly like that, or it was kind of you're just trying to fit in?
Or even it was like a seed planted from something else.
Yeah.
As far as like what you personally like?
Yeah,
Like the glasses, for example. You know, you're known for wearing the colored glasses.
That was, again, just sort of, it's curiosity, I think, is really the main thing. I always view myself as, I love learning, right? I love being a student. So like that example was, okay, I was wearing my yellow shooting glasses, you know, for the gun range when I started shooting, and everything was just brighter. And I was like, I feel better wearing these. And I remember in that example, my mother-in-law had asked me, she goes, why are you wearing those all the time? I said, I just feel better. I said, there's got to be a reason. It's the color.
Right.
So then I started researching it, you know, and I found that, you know, okay, there's companies out there that make different colored glasses. So I tried them out, and, you know, it wasn't done it's not done for, okay, let me try to make a spectacle. It was like, I like the way they make me feel.
That's what I'm about to say. Yeah. So you don't wear the glasses because visually other people think it looks good. You wear the glasses because it makes you feel better.
Yeah.
So that's what you apply that to your whole entire branding, personal branding.
Yeah.
Whatever makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And you find that thing, you're going to stick with that.
You stick with it, right? It's like when, you know, when I do what people think would be silly stuff with the little hair that I have left, I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
So stick it outside the box.
Yeah, 100%. And you like it. So,
yeah.
You know?
And that's where it comes to just embracing who you are. And really not, you know, one thing I've been blessed with a lot is I usually don't really care what other people think.
Yeah.
You know, at this point, which is freedom. You know, but
absolutely.
And other people, though, once they get a taste of that, you can see their wheels are spinning. You know, but they have to have the courage to say it's okay if people think I'm strange or whatever.
Was it hard for you to get past that, or were you just like screw, or you never really cared? Because I feel like that's a big thing. A lot of people, including myself, you know what I mean. It's hard. It goes back to the survival.
The judgment and all that.
Yeah. Was it difficult for you when you first like kind of stepped into it, or were you just?
But I mean, it was like an evolution.
Okay.
You know, where it was like, okay, do you try to fit in? You know, and think back to college and stuff like that. But even that, and I was kind of doing my own thing. You know, I was in a fraternity, which people were always surprised at. And the only reason I did that was because there was a couple of guys from my hometown, and it wasn't like a fraternity where everybody was the same. Like everybody was kind of had their own thing. You know, but even then, you know, I would go out like once a week, and the other night I would get food and watch a movie by myself. You know, because I knew that, okay, I like doing that, you know, rather than being around a lot of people. You know, and then over time, it just, like I said, in 2020, I think it really clicked with, you know, just be out there. Maybe it was when I opened the gym with COVID, you know, and I had principles and core values that I was very clear on.
100%.
That I was going to live by.
Yeah.
No matter what.
And we're gonna get to the COVID incident. But like, when did like everything start? I mean, I think you told us a bunch of times that, you know, one of the first workout videos was pumping iron for you.
Yeah.
Is that where like the entire love for fitness and bodybuilding and everything came from? And how does that fit into your brand now?
Yeah. Well, that was like my first passion, and that was really probably my junior year, going into my junior year of high school. You know, where that was before I discovered pumping iron, but it was really out of, okay, I wanted to build confidence. You know, and I thought if I had bigger muscles, that would help me be less awkward maybe, right? Or just feel better about myself. So I was reading, we would always get all the bodybuilding magazines, me and my brothers. You know, the guys we were hanging out with, that was our thing. We'd go to the gym, go eat. You know, and it was, some of the guys were big guys, still are big guys. So it was just, we had our little crew of, you know, 7, 8 guys. And then we did that, and then I started at, you know, okay, let me study how do you actually get bigger, you know, going down that, you know, reading the magazines. But then the first book I ever read on the topic, I ordered from an ad in the back of one of the magazines. I remember I gave my mom the money, she wrote a check.
No way.
We mailed it in. I still have the book. And it was really like a scientific book, right? And I started implementing that right away, you know, and it was such a different way of training than anybody was doing at that time. You know, and then I don't even know how I heard about pumping iron. It might have been a guy at the gym, or I read about it, and one of my friends was working at Dollar Video, you know, when they used to have all the video stores. So I was one of the original ones in Hillsborough. And he said, yeah, we have a copy, because nobody ever even knows what it is. Nobody, he goes, you could just have it. So he gave it to me.
That's crazy. Do you still have it?
I think my parents have it.
That's awesome.
There's a video cassette, and I'd watch it all the time. You know, I'd watch a little bit or watch the whole thing. You know, but seeing that first time, and with Arnold too, I was already a fan of his. I remember watching movies when I was a kid with my grandfather, you know, like Predator, Raw Deal, you know, and just being like, man, who is this? You know, look at this guy.
Yeah.
You know,
Was he
a massive personal brand?
Yeah.
Think about
Yeah.
it, you know?
Now he's a massive personal brand. That was gonna be my question though. Like during that time, if nobody knew like what that magazine was, did Arnold have that big of a presence back in the day, or?
Yeah, when I was in high school, because he was already at that point, you know, you could say, you know, the #1 action star.
Okay.
You know, and he had, you know, he had the accent. He looked unlike anybody else. And even with him, because I would read his biographies and I would read everything about him, they tried to get him to, they said, look, you're not going to make it with the accent. We got to change your name. So in one of his first movies, I think it's like Hercules in New York, it might have been his first. Before Conan, his name was actually Arnold Strong. They changed it to that.
No way.
So I thought it would resonate. And then he was like, forget this. He goes, I'm not doing that. I'm going to be who I am.
Right.
You know, and he made it work. You know, but he studied it too. Like he would take English classes. He would work on that. You know, he was, you know, when he was bodybuilding, he was a bricklayer. He was still he was learning all these skills. He was learning how to get into real estate, you know, but he had that vision of he wanted to be the #1 action star.
Yeah.
And like, you know, you look at it from a business point of view, that's why he came back in 1980 to compete in the Olympia. And people only knew like 2 days before that he was actually even competing. You know, and some of the bodybuilders, legendary bodybuilders, never competed again after that because they said it was fixed. Because he didn't look like he did in his prime. Looked good enough to win, but he did that just to promote Conan that was coming out.
Gotcha.
You know, he knew that, okay.
Did you watch it?
Yeah, oh yeah, I had it on DVD, you know.
So Arnold was definitely a massive inspiration.
Yeah, yeah.
And did you apply a lot of that on the upbringing of the personal brand yourself?
Yeah, I think it was.
Or subconsciously, maybe.
Yeah, I think definitely both consciously and subconsciously, because he had the vision, you know, and he was. A lot of people don't think of him as an athlete, but when I look at athletes, you know, I put like him and Michael Jordan as far as most dominant mindsets. You know, so he had that vision that nothing was going to stop him. And then even in Pumping Iron, you know, you find out later, like there's scenes in that movie where he talked about his mom called and he was like 2 weeks out from the Olympia, said, your dad died, you got to come home. And he said, no, it's over, he's dead, I'm not coming home, I got to win this.
No way.
He made that up, it wasn't true.
Oh, really?
But he knew that it would be good for
Publicity.
you know, so
Yeah.
he embellished, you know, so there's some truth in it probably. He said, well, maybe I can't come until this time. But he knew that, okay, he's got to promote himself, right? And he was always looking at, you know, the bodybuilding was a stepping stone for him. Like Joe Weider was teaching him about business. He would always, you know, was a mentor of his. And Joe Weider started letting him put ads in the magazines. They started selling courses, like early info publishing.
Oh, wow.
He would sell the courses, right? And he would ship them out. And
yeah, nobody really thinks about all that.
yeah.
You know, they just see it at face value.
Yeah.
Of who he is or who he was.
Yeah, but he had that vision from when he was like 12 years old. He was telling his friends in Austria he was going to go to America. He was going to be the best bodybuilder of all time. He was going to be the #1 Hollywood star, and he was going to go into American politics. And he couldn't even speak English at that time.
That's crazy.
So it shows you just like the power of the mind. That's what I mean. It was unbelievable.
Power of the mind is insane.
Yeah, I mean, he set his mind to it, and that was it.
Yeah, and I think subconsciously that definitely, I guess, spilled over to you as well.
Yeah.
Because, you know, even with the Panda, black and white,
Yeah,
when you make a decision, you don't sever from it.
you gotta go with it.
You know.
You know, and even how he would, I don't know if he went over that in Pumping Iron or one of the books I read on him, but the way he would talk to himself in the third person, right? So you have like, different parts of yourself. But he would, talk to Arnold. Come on, Arnold, you got to be able to do this. You got to be able to beat this guy. You got to train harder. So he knew how to like separate and
like
push himself.
Self affirmation.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Do you use a lot of any of those techniques?
Yeah. Yeah. The theater of the mind, visualization, and obviously my coach, Matt Fury, he's like the number one guy with that. He owns the rights to Psycho-Cybernetics. He owns the book. So I get to learn directly from him with that stuff, and how to really, everything comes down to a picture in your mind, how you can change it. If you're not feeling good, I caught myself yesterday being like, and I was like, what am I picturing in my head? And I just switched the picture. So it's such simple stuff that you can use. And then Arnold talking about in the Pumping Iron how when he would train his biceps, he would picture them, each rep, the biceps getting bigger, and it's filling up the room. And he would picture this, right? So you think about that visualization, that he would do that. There were so many things, so I use all that stuff. It's that saying, success leaves clues. So at the time watching that wasn't why I was watching it, but I picked up on it. That there's just mental.
Yeah.
So when you took over, or when you bought that first magazine or DVD, right?
It was a book.
Book.
Yeah, Big Beyond Belief.
Is that like the first time you started like really experimenting with different ways in fitness and how your body responds to things? Like, take us through that, because you're big on fasting. Everybody knows you for fasting.
Yeah.
Like, how did that journey take place?
Yeah, well, up until then, obviously we trained a little bit for high school sports. That still wasn't a big thing. We had a strength coach who still coaches there at Hillsborough, and we would go to the summer workouts, but I didn't enjoy it, but he would push us really hard on the track, and so I was exposed to it, but it was just, okay, this is going to get you better at football or whatever you're doing. And then when I started really falling in love with lifting, it was from the bodybuilding aspect. So it was just really doing your standard, what the magazine said, leg day or chest and triceps or whatever. Then when I got this book, it was written by Leo Costa and Tom Platz, who was one of the best bodybuilders ever. It was based in like a Bulgarian system of training, Eastern Europe, and it was really where I learned about stress response and the nervous system and how to cycle your training, and it was full body training, which again, nobody besides like Olympic athletes was really doing at that point. So I just took it and I started following it, and I'd be in the gym for hours. I'd be at the YMCA was the first gym that I joined that my dad got me a membership to, and I would go in there and just, see what I could do, follow the program. Then when I went to college, I kept doing that, right? Again, nobody was training like that at that time.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Just do a body part, all that silliness.
Was anybody looking at you like weird at the gym?
I don't know if
like, what is this guy doing?
Yeah, I don't know if in college, but when I came back in winter breaks or summer break, and then, as I finished college, and I was really developing my training style, and then I interned with Jay over at Rutgers, and that was at that point I had already decided, okay, I want to compete in a natural bodybuilding show. But I saw he was training the guys as athletes, but they were also putting on muscle. I said, okay, there's a way to make this so I enjoy it. And at that point, within the next couple of years at the gym, people would come up to me and ask me, can you write me a program? I remember somebody said, what are you doing, CrossFit? I didn't even know what CrossFit was. So I was doing this before CrossFit
That's wild.
Existed.
Yeah. So you were always meant to be a coach.
Yeah. And it was just
You're a coach at heart.
Yeah, but it was really for myself.
Right.
First.
Well, I feel like that's where it needs to start.
Yeah, it was for myself, and then learning how to, compete in the bodybuilding shows and go through that grueling process.
Yeah.
Again, at the time, the only guy that was around that was doing that was a Wolverine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how we became friends, because there was nobody else competing locally that I knew of. So he kind of would guide me a little bit, and then we started training together, and then I would help him get ready for his shows. He would help me at my shows, and it was, really that's when in like 2007, I really dove into the self-development stuff, and that was the year, probably the most memorable year I had with competing, because I hadn't competed in a couple of years because I had, some really bad episodes of TMS that we've talked about, psychosomatic illnesses that put me into a really bad depression. And they say, okay, I got to do something, because I was just teach. At the time I was a teacher, and I would go home, teach, go home. I was just like a hermit.
Gotcha.
I'd lost so much weight. And then I started, there was another bodybuilder called Skip LaCour. His name was Skip LaCour, and he was the #1 natural bodybuilder in the world. So I got some of his books. But he was really into self-development. So he would mention Tony Robbins and this, so I would start getting the books. And I just started reading those, really diving down that whole world.
So in college and in high school, were you always like had a knack for reading and
No.
Did you have good grades?
I remember my first semester, they almost got, my parents were ready to kill me because I had like a 2.1.
That's
like,
surprising.
what are you doing?
I can't believe that.
And I'm like, well, I look at it just never really interested me sitting in class.
Yeah.
My brothers were all very academically smart. They all got, on their SATs, like, I think the lowest was like 1450.
Yeah.
Wow.
The first time I took it, I got 970. Then my mom made me take a course, and I got like 1140 or whatever. And but it just didn't interest me. And the first book I read besides that training book for my own purposes was, I think it was a junior in college. It was Friday Night Lights, which I've made shows off and a movie, and it was just really a good book. But I remember when my dad still talks about when I graduated, I said, I'm never reading another book again. And he's like, now look how many books you have. And
It's crazy, because I've been with you at the airport, and you're, as we're waiting for the flight, you're reading newspapers, books, on the flight, newspapers, books, layover, newspaper. You're like a machine, man. You don't even stop.
Yeah, so I feel like something's missing if there's a day where I don't get to read at least something, at least a little bit. And that's where I realized, okay, that's like my #1 passion, reading or learning. And the best way for me to learn then is to take it and then teach it.
Right.
So kind of just, the coaching kind of, again, selfishly, but it was all right.
It's full
I learn
circle.
this, teach it, and then I learn it more. I still do that. Even stuff I've talked about 1,000 times, every time I teach it, I'm like, okay, I learned something different about it, or how to explain it, or I found out something I didn't know, so now I got to study that.
Yeah.
When did you start paying for mentors? Like, you told us that you've worked with Louis Simmons and Mountain Dog.
Yeah, the first coach I ever hired for my own, fitness and mindset was Scott Abel. And that was 2000, I think it was 2008 or 9, when I was teaching. But before that, I had already been going to seminars. I started getting, whatever I'd make with teaching would go towards the business at that time, educating myself, buying DVDs and CDs and all this stuff. Like, that was all I wanted, was stuff I could learn. So it's what my mom and, my family members would get me for like Christmas and stuff, was stuff that, okay, I want this DVD by this guy. And then as far as, looking at like the business aspect, I think it was 2010 probably when I joined that mastermind. When I was there, I'm going to pay whatever it was a month, $300 a month.
Right.
But I knew the power of the masterminds from reading like Napoleon Hill and,
Gotcha.
but again, they weren't really a big thing at the time.
Yeah.
Especially in fitness, it wasn't a common thing at all.
And I feel like it's just starting to really kind of take off now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a very new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
and
is.
it's a principle that's been around forever, but it's
Not as accessible, I would say.
yeah. Especially if you wanted to find it in your field, you would really have to search. I was lucky that those guys, that Zach was here in New Jersey, Paul was here in New Jersey. I was fortunate.
Yeah. When did you know that the entrepreneurial route was something that you needed to do?
What's funny is when I got to show you guys the flyer. My mom found it. When I was 10, I think, we started our own lawn cutting business, me and my brothers. But I was really the one that, went full into it. Like I was like, all right, we got 3 lawns the first year. Then and it was funny. The first marketing pieces weren't bad for like a 10 or 11-year-old. It was like, you want to enjoy your summer? Let me cut your lawn. Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not bad.
The graphics on there and everything. And then there was I remember because we had a push mower and we're cutting these huge yards. So it would take us 3 or 4 hours. Sometimes I would do half. I would switch with my older brother or whatever. We're getting paid like $20 or $25 for 4 hours of work. But I loved it, right?
Yeah.
And there was this local kid, lived very close. He had already had his same age as me. We graduated together, lawn cutting business, and he would ride up on his Cub Cadet. I remember the yellow, I thought it was like awesome. And I couldn't really compete with that, I remember the one time he was like taunting me because I was cutting this big yard, and he came and he cut like 2 strips, and he did it like, what took me like an hour, he did it in like 2 minutes.
Oh my God.
But then I kept growing that. I think when I eventually stopped doing that, might have been like 12, 13 yards. Then I'd convinced my dad to get us a little ride-on tractor, so I'd do it in local neighborhoods. We got a trailer, and we'd ride there ourselves. We'd put the push mower and the weed whacker and the leaf blower in the trailer. And when I was teaching, when I got into the self-development, that first year, when I was overcoming that phantom illness, when I got into the self-development, that was when I was like, all right, I got to start my own business, and it's either going to be lawn care, because I love doing that, or personal training. And I was leaning towards the lawn care, and for some reason I picked the personal training because obviously that was a passion of mine too. And it was from that point that I was just always kind of drawn to that, being in charge of myself, not relying on.
You were a teacher at one point.
Yeah, I was teaching at that time. I started teaching in 2006. Because when I got out of college, I interned for Jay at Rutgers, you guys know, and that's what I thought, because I went to Delaware for fitness management, right? And I remember my parents were like, well, what are you going to do with that? And even, going through the program, they were kind of like, they didn't really give you any guidance as far as the stuff they would throw out there that you could do. I was like, I have no interest in doing that.
Yeah.
But they said, oh, you got to do an internship, like 500 hours to finish. Then I reached out to Jay randomly. I shot him an email. He's like, yeah, come in. So I went in, and at the end of the summer, I remember he's like, so what are you going to do? And at that point, those were grueling hours, being a collegiate strength coach. I was like, I think I'm going to go back to school for teaching, because that's what my mom did. So I went back to Kane University for phys ed, and I do that, working at my dad's restaurant, just doing that and, training. And then when I came out, it was like, okay, teaching is a nice profession. You have a lot of flexibility. But even as soon as I got into the teaching, I started helping at the high school weight room in Bridgewater. And in year 2, when Coach Galida was getting ready to leave, by then I had started the business. And I remember I was at IHOP with my grandparents, and he called and he said, look, I'm going to be stepping down. We want you to take over. And it was even nowadays for teaching, right, it was like 3 seasons, $8,000 a season for the stipend. And I told him, I'm like, no, can't do it. I said, I got my own business. It's going to take up too much time.
It's insane.
But a year before that, I would have died to be able to do that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. When did you have that switch?
It was really when I decided that, okay, I'm starting my own business, and I need to really focus on this and, develop all aspects of that in myself.
Did that feel right? Felt right?
Yeah, because logically it didn't really make sense, right? I was teaching, I could have had that, that extra cash coming in from doing the weight room, which I would, at the time too, with what my goal was to be the top strength coach I could be. That was like ideal, running a big high school weight room, being in charge of that, getting to put together all the programs. And
were they upset?
Galida was disappointed, because he kind of, we took a liking to each other. And he knew that I knew what I was doing, so it was a big help both ways. I got him introduced to Jay, and the Rutgers guys would go over there some mornings, observe what they were doing. And so I think he was a little, shocked that I said no, but I think he understood. But it was, it was kind of just went with my gut.
It's awesome.
As far as this is what I have to do.
You had 3 different paths that you could have taken.
Yeah.
Could have been a lawn service care,
Yeah.
gym teacher,
Yeah.
and now you're the PandaMan.
Yeah. I would always teach the kids when I was teaching. I was still doing a lot of the same stuff I'm doing as far as the body and the mind. I was teaching the kids. I was teaching them how to meditate, teaching them self-belief. And I would always, teach them. I would do a lesson every year where it was like, okay, what do you guys want to do when you get older? And I said, if anybody ever tells you can't do it, I said, walk away from them.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember when I put my letter in, which was a funny story, but I put my letter of resignation in October of 2012. And obviously I had to go 60 more days, so I was going to go up to Christmas break. So, told the kids and all that, and they were disappointed. And it was really a hard decision because I loved doing that.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was a great job, great community. I got to know a lot of the families really well. And when they said, why are you leaving? Well, I said, what do I always tell you guys? I said, if I'm going to tell you that to go for your dreams and I don't do it, I said, it doesn't mean anything.
Very true.
I said, so I'm going to do this. And I said, you guys will be fine with whoever comes in, but even getting to that point, I was at a mastermind in October. So I was just coming off the year before, the spring before, I had a really bad case of pneumonia, really bad. And then a couple weeks later, stupidly, I'm playing in a men's basketball league. I'm burning the candle, I'm waking up at the crack of dawn to study, then train people, to go to school, teach, and go back to the gym. And then I had my first patellar tendon rupture, and me and Devin, we knew that, okay, my body's telling me that you cannot keep up this schedule.
Yeah.
Right? And we both kind of knew that.
How many hours were you up?
Man, I would get up stupid hours, man, 3:30, 4. And I would study. I remember Carl Sanfilippo the one time I posted something on Facebook. He's like, why are you up at this time? And I was like, that's what I have to do. And I was even doing that when I was
That's
still
savagery.
At my parents' house. I'd get up, before work or whatever I was doing that day, or going back to school, and other DVDs on building a fitness business. I'd be listening to them on the computer downstairs, taking notes. And so me and Devin knew that I was going to stop. I had a couple more years to go before I would be vested in the pension system. And I was out at this random mastermind in Arizona. I met this guy, Dave Freeze. He's a lawyer. I met him at the Dan Kennedy event. We were sitting in the hot tub or something, and we started talking. He said, I want you to come out to my mastermind. So I went out there. It had nothing to do with fitness. It was just random businesses. And this lady came up to me on one of the breaks, and she's like, you got to stop teaching. It's holding you back. Then that was all she said. I was like, huh. So I told Devin as soon as she picked me up at the airport, she's like, she's right. She's like, let's do it. So it wasn't planned that way. It was October, mid-year. I remember it was such a hard decision again because I loved what I was doing. And then you had, it was a nice safety net. And that week, first time I met Vince, it was later that week. I put the letter in I wrote it, talked to my principal, who I was really close with. He's still there. And he said, no, I think it's the right move. But most people were saying, what are you doing? This is nuts. You got a great job. It's very hard to get a phys ed job like that.
Yeah.
Put the letter in, went to a seminar Vince and Paul Reddick were having at Vince's place.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, it was
That was all in the same week?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Saturday, Sunday. And I remember one Saturday, I handed the letter in that Friday, the Friday before Halloween. Sunday, they're like, we're going to let you guys go early because this storm is coming. I was like, what are you talking about? It was Hurricane Sandy. Everything's shutting down. We're going to get you guys out of here early. So that Sunday, the storm comes through, and it literally ripped the roof off the gym that I had, back on one of the old units, and everything got wet, and it was just kind of destroyed. But I already handed my letter in, so I looked at it okay, God's testing me, right? Am I going to run back to what I was doing?
Yeah.
Or, keep going forward. So it was it was definitely playing with my mind. And then I had to find a new unit, so they put me in a temporary spot. Again, I've now, the clock's ticking. And I looked at where the winemaker's place is next to the current gym on the corner. That was
Gotcha.
one of the spots. And I went and looked with my father-in-law, to get his guidance, and it was double the size or triple the size of what I had at the time. Again, now I'm not teaching anymore, and I was hoping he was going to be like, "No, play it safe." And he's like, "Go big or go home. This is what you wanted."
No way.
That's
So I signed the lease,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then that was it.
That was your dad?
My father-in-law.
Or father-in-law?
Yeah,
That's sick.
my father-in-law. Yeah, he came and looked, and he's he was an entrepreneur. He owned an Allstate agency. He was always a business owner, but he usually plays it safe. So it's but he kept pushing me along. At that time, I think I had Gabe wound up coaching for me, which again was a godsend when I injured my knee because I was in a wheelchair for a long time.
So your knee injury was right after you quit teaching?
It was right before. So it was that really kind of got me and Devin thinking, we're probably going to have to do this sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Step away from that. And because again, my body was telling me, I got pneumonia, I got this. And
it's crazy too, because it's almost like
everything. Sorry, I mean, but it seems like everything was against. You trying to get to this point.
Yeah, I was literally about to say that. Or you could even look at it as like God saying to you, like, all right, you wanted this. I'm going to make your life a living hell, but it's going to make you into the person that you are today.
It's totally. And it was something in a book I read prior to that, where, by Stephen Pressfield, where if you're trying to elevate yourself, you're going to face resistance. It's going to be there. And so I kind of use that then and now. Okay, if you're feeling resistance towards it, it means you're going the right direction.
100%. I mean, look at how many times that when we started working together, it was just, how many times I had to get called back to the trucking company.
Yeah.
Until we finally were like, we're 100% out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It felt like it definitely like exploded the growth for our company, for both of us. And there's people in life that are going to pull you in different directions because they want you to fit the norm.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big thing that we learned from you. I remember when one of the maybe second or third workout I came to, you're like, you should try a 48-hour fast. I'm like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? And but now we're doing it all the time. It's just like, it's crazy. Like, I think, the cool thing about what we do is, because we said on the first podcast, there was a lot of people that we work with are also mentors for us. And, we look at you not just as a client or a friend or family, but we look at you as a mentor as well. And you taught us a lot of stuff. And I think one of the biggest things that you taught us to do since the start of this was open your mind to things and question everything.
Yeah.
And we never did that before.
Yeah.
We just kind of like went forward and just kind of did what the day brought us to do, but now we just question everything.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I really do. Yeah, and I get deep into it too.
Yeah.
Because I feel it's so easy to just get sucked into the everyday machine.
It is. It is, and it's it's funny, like what you say with the fast and stuff, right? And one of my longtime clients, she's a member in Hillsborough, but I do mind mapping with her. Pat, from Saturday mornings. And at the end today, she goes, "You really have a brilliant mind." I don't ever like that kind of attention, but she said, "Somehow you have me doing this like 48-hour fast, 72 hours." She goes, "If you told me that 2 years ago, I was going to be working out twice a day, walking and training." She goes, "I would have told you you're nuts." And I said, "Well, Pat, it's just me being curious, and I do it, tell people about it, and then people can." They observe, right?
Yeah, and I think that's why online too you'll get a lot of trolls that will. You're going against the norm. Yeah. And you're going against their norm. Yeah. So they react to it.
They react. Their belief is the enemy of knowing, and I wrote today's email about what I think about the sugar docs. I had 4 people ask me yesterday.
I sent you that thing yesterday too.
From Mark, right? And I said, look, I think Mark, that's why I get along with him real well, is he's similar in as far as he just tries stuff.
Right.
Right? But then you see the results, but people believe this, but they see this, and they won't empty their mind. So it's like, instead of being like, oh, well, maybe there's something there, they just attack it.
Yeah.
You know, they attack it because it doesn't align.
What is that, you think?
It's people will die for their beliefs.
Yeah, that's
Think
true.
about every war,
Yeah.
you know, and they don't realize though that your beliefs can change
True.
at any moment. You know, on one of my YouTubes I think it was last week, some guy posted, "Weren't you pushing carnivore?" I said, well, first, I said, you have the wrong guy. I said, I've never pushed it. Another guy responded, he goes, it's called growth. You know, you can change your mind. And I said, I've always said I could change my mind as I learn more.
Yeah.
I'm not, you know, if I learn something better, then I do it.
Right.
Right. But a lot of people just have that, you know, they stop learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they don't, you know, and I think everybody's mind is different, right? And it's such a unique thing, but, you know, being interested in Bigfoot as a kid and stuff like that always just kept my mind open to what's possible, what is real.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up too with the Bigfoot thing, but before we get into the Bigfoot, and then we're going to wrap this thing back to the COVID event, but like what got you into fasting? Like what was that whole ordeal?
Yeah.
How'd you land on it? How are you like, okay, this is what I'm going to do? And did you even feel when you first found out about fasting, were you like, what the hell is this shit? I'm not going to do it?
Yeah. I'd heard about it. You know, you'd hear about it, you know, all the readings I was doing at that time, competing. You know, it wasn't a common thing, but I would hear it and I would buy into, how can I do that? I'm going to lose muscle and can't do that, you know, silliness. But meanwhile, when I look back, I was always training fasted. I always just felt better training in the morning on empty stomach. And then it was 2014 when I was coming back from the knee injury. I said, okay, I'm going to compete again. I want Devin she'd never seen me compete. You know, we weren't together the last time I competed in 2008. And I was about 8 weeks out from the show, just studying, reading stuff about fat loss. And Lyle McDonald, this guy, you know, he's a real sciencey guy, but he talked about stubborn fat and how really the only thing that can increase blood flow to those areas is fasting.
Yeah.
And right away I was like, all right, I'm going to try it the next day. It wasn't what I'm doing now, but it was, okay, I was only eating like 1,500-1,600 calories, 4 meals, because that was as small as I could break it down.
Mm-hmm.
And it was miserable doing that when I would get ready for a show. But I said, I'm going to take that and make it 2 meals and do like a 16-hour fast. And right away, I was like, this is way easier.
Yeah.
When did you do your first 72-hour fast?
2019.
And how was that experience? And why'd you come across, all right, maybe I got to go longer for him?
Yeah, so then I was doing the, you know, intermittent fasting from 2014 to 19. And it was during the Fat Shredder that year. It was the last time I actually did it for the gym, but we were having a competition with the staff. We had a lot of young guys on the staff. And at that point, you know, I was like, all right, this is good what I'm doing, but I still had to watch my calories and all that, because I had what I call metabolic damage from competing and doing it the wrong way for so long. So I was like, there's got to be another way to do this where I can eat a lot, right? And so I don't know how I came across it, but I started looking into long form fasting. I remember telling my brothers, you know, I think I'm going to try going 2 days without eating. And I remember the first time I was like, wow, this is crazy. You know, that I felt okay. And then the first night going to sleep without eating, I'm like, I don't know if I've ever done that in my life where I went a day without eating.
Yeah.
And then I was like, all right, I'm going to try 72. You know, and then I did that. And it was, you know, that's where the Panda diet was, you know, created.
You know,
Doing
That's
that
crazy.
the whole summer, that first summer, and just tracking everything, seeing, you know, and I kept upping my food intake, so I was still tracking stuff at that time.
Right.
I was like, oh my gosh, I keep double my food and I'm losing body fat and weight. So then I knew, I'm like, all right, this is the way.
And it's not just regular eating either, right? Because you're as everybody probably knows, or maybe people that don't know, Kyle is a world-class champion eater, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
You got to tell him about the IHOP experience.
Or Waffle House? Or,
Yeah, Waffle
sorry,
House.
Waffle House, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a voracious appetite, you know, just naturally. And, you know, part of that is also probably, you know, nurture, you know, growing up with 3 brothers, and it was eat what you can, you know, while the food's out. And I also, up until that, when I was trying to gain weight, I would force myself to eat, you know, to the point of vomiting a lot of times. So I was really always just trying to push it.
Just to pack on size?
Yeah. purely for that, and so, I kind of had that laid out, and then I knew with competing that I didn't know the mechanism. I'd already kind of made up my own cheat day theory in college, and it didn't make sense when I brought it to the head of the nutrition department at Delaware. I said, look, here's what I'm doing. And if you look at the calories, it doesn't make sense because I'm getting leaner, I'm losing weight. Can you explain this? He's like, it doesn't make sense. He's like, I'm like, oh, it's working though. So I was like, he's useless. And, because I was like, I see that it's working.
Don't be a square.
Yeah, don't be a square. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I'm like, but it does make sense. So then after competing, as I got into that, I realized the first couple I could not get full. But it's not. I didn't want that because I went from bodybuilding shape to 40 pounds heavier a week later. Didn't even look like the same person. Then you would do all that work. You want to maintain that look at least, right? And it was put me into a bad funk. So then that's when part of the reason I hired Scott when I did is he had like a DVD called The Cycle Diet, and he explained this, how you could stay lean and stay in a deficit, but you could have these crazy cheat days when you're in what's called super compensation mode.
How do you get into that?
You got to be, most of the time you got to be pretty lean, right? And it's just a metabolic state where your hunger hormones are through the roof, right?
And you can achieve that with the Panda diet.
Yeah, but it's not the same. Like now, on a cheat day, I would almost have to train myself to increase the frequency of, how often I'm eating.
Oh, gotcha.
Right. So on those days, way back when I was full go with that, I would 25,000 calories in a day.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But then you feel terrible.
Oh,
You're falling asleep halfway through the day. Next day you feel terrible.
I mean, when we went to South Carolina, I watched you order 3 burritos and tacos on the side. So I think you still got the appetite.
I still have the appetite, but it's just over the full day. I'm like, oh, should I try to build back? Because it was fun, but it was. And then when we were going to the Outer Banks that year, so that was, so I'd started the fasting. I competed in 2 shows, and I found I was able to maintain pretty close to contest shape through the fasting. So I was still in that super compensation mode. So then this end of the summer, it was August 10th, I remember it was my birthday. Me and Devin were going down with Martina, our one dog at the time, to meet my family. And, it was a bunch of people going down to the Outer Banks. And it was my cheat day, it was Sunday. So we got up, and I used to live for those cheat days. And I said, all right, as soon as we leave, we're going to Dunkin' Donuts. We got a dozen donuts. I literally finished, I was driving, finished them before we got to Princeton. Box of Girl Scout cookies. She made this huge thing of rice pudding. I ate that, bag of Butterfingers, and then we get to Waffle House in Virginia Beach. And, I love, I just always liked it the first time I was exposed to it. So we go there, and it's packed. And I tell her, I'm like, don't tell them it's my birthday. I don't want to make, I don't like the attention. And there's nowhere to sit but at the tabletop, the bar. So it's this father and son, I have a Rutgers football shirt on, they start talking to me, you can see that I train, and start talking about training. And I order my food, I say, I want 3 of the peanut butter waffles and scrambled eggs and coffee. And the lady's like, she's like, I thought you said 3 for a second. I go, I dshe goes, I've never seen anybody eat more than 2. So then,
that's crazy.
But then she starts telling me, it's all open there. And she starts, this guy's going to eat 3. So I do that, and I'm clearly polishing that off. I'm like, I want to get 2 more. And then it starts becoming a scene, right? And again, I'd already eaten a lot at that point. It's only like noon. And then the manager comes out, he goes, if you do 2 more, I'll buy your meal. And I was like, I'm not going to do it, because I said, my day is going to be ruined.
Yeah.
At that point, I still had to drive. I could have forced myself, but I still had to drive another 4 hours.
Yeah. Oh, dude, no way.
That would have sucked. It was, so he gave me the Waffle House hat, and then we stopped there on the way back home a week later, and they remembered us. He came out, said hi, all this stuff. And I think he did buy my meal that time.
That's awesome.
And now, last time I've tried 5 there, I did it no problem. That was a couple of years ago.
We got to get that on video next time.
Yeah.
You think you can still do it or not?
Yeah, I could do it. Do
you want to do it?
Yeah, if the appetite's there, I'm in that state.
True.
It's because I think each of them is, 900, 950 as far as calories.
Damn.
So that's more with, just regular fasting. But I could tell lately you've been more into dry fasting. And how when did you kind of stumble upon that? How long have you been experimenting with that? And where are you with that right now?
So the first summer in 19, I heard about that, and I kind of forced myself to do a few 48-hour dry fasts, but I wasn't mentally ready for them, but I did them. And, I tested it. And then, I kind of stopped looking at it for a while. And then a couple of years ago, I went back to it and did more of it, and then I stopped at that time. So I was doing it like weekly, a 2-day, nothing crazy. But then, I remember I hadn't gone for blood work in a while. And then, met with the doctor and he said, something going on with your kidneys. But I had known that the reason I wanted to go, I'm like, we got 3 kids now. I should probably look and make sure everything's okay. But going back to, I think, high school, my filtration number was always low. I think it's probably from when I took Accutane. Nobody knows for sure. So at that point, he's like, him and my buddy Frank, you got to stop the dry fasting. It's terrible for your kidneys. So I stopped for that period of time. And then, this year, I was like, okay, what I was doing with the Fat Shredder protocol, started reading more about it and really researching it and experimenting with it. And then I started thinking, and I told one of my clients, he said, well, aren't you nervous about your kidneys? I said, well, the flip side is my kidneys are getting a break. So you look at it like that.
Yeah.
And I get my blood work now every 6 months with my kidney doctor, and he looks, and it hasn't gotten worse. So that's what we're looking at.
Nice. Yeah.
So the dry fasting has a lot of health benefits and obviously body composition benefits, and I think it's just at the next level of it,
Right.
where you have to really master your mind further to do that.
What's the longest you've gone dry fasting?
I've done a 3-day a couple times, and
They say you can't go without water for 3 days.
yeah, it's not true.
You turned that into a myth?
Yeah, and that's people have gone far longer than me with dry fasting, and it's one of the lies we've been told. I think because of how many health benefits there are in longevity, in any disease. If you ever get a disease that's a serious disease, I tell people just dry fast as long as you can tolerate, break it, and then do it again.
Yeah.
And just keep doing that so your body can heal.
It's interesting.
Well, we got one more time. I think one time for one more story, and then we got to do a part 2 of this.
Yeah.
Because this is awesome.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
I think we're really getting into some cool topics.
Yeah.
And deep into some topics.
100%. So I think either we can get into the Bigfoot, which I think probably for next one, because that's a long story, right?
Yeah.
And then I think just because it just passed the anniversary, just tell us about the COVID incident, like what went down. And
Yeah, so I knew from when that started, again, just always questioning everything. I'd been hearing about this from November of the year prior, right? And right as soon as I heard it, I was like, nah, it's just something in my gut. I'm like, this is BS. I just knew. I'm like, this is not. And then that December, I got a really bad case of the flu. It was after we went up to, our mutual friend, the mentor Louis. I went up to their party in Hoboken, so near the city. So it's possible whatever COVID was that I had an early case of it, before anybody knew what it was, and I was in bad shape. And so it was on my mind, flu, right? And so it was like front and center for me. So I remember that December, there was a documentary on December and January on Netflix. It was like a top documentary about this flu that can get out of control, this pandemic. And they also had a documentary about Bill Gates at the same time, right?
so they're telling you.
Yeah, and and then as it progressed, I'm like, they told you right in front of your face. They put it right out there. It's some pre-programming. So then when stuff kept coming along, then March comes, and people are getting worked up, the first week in March, second week in March, and I was giving a seminar March 13th with a doctor about testosterone, and he calls me, he's like, I'm backing out. He goes, this is bad, this thing that's coming. He goes, it's not safe. I'm like, well, I'm still doing it. I got 60 guys coming. remember I got Corona beers, for the coronavirus. And so we did it, and there was like 60 guys there. And that next Monday is really when they shut everything down. And I was kind of pissed because I was going against my gut to even close the gym.
Right.
But the staff was, fear and all this stuff, right? But I knew, I was like, this is not what they're saying it is. And then time went on, and then finally I remember Devin, we were already thinking of open the gym. We already decided, okay, we're going to do a soft open, make sure that's, and I was just doing it to give the community and the members a sense of hope that, hey, because at that time it seemed like it was just never going to end.
Yeah, it really did.
I was like, I want to do this to give people hope. And I decided, me and Devin, I remember we were laying in a hammock one day outside talking about it. And I'm like, listen, I'll do, and she felt the same way, anything to protect my kids' freedom and give them a normal, experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we decided we're going to do it. And then it's like May 10th. I read something in the paper or online. It said LA already said they're closed through August. And this is early May. And I was like, this is just ridiculous. Like, you could just feel everybody's energy was down. So I went on, it was a Facebook group that I was in, Open New Jersey or something. And I went to a rally prior to that down in Trenton, because again, I was just like so fed up with everything. And I went on that group and I said, look, I'm opening my gym next Monday. It was May 18th. I said, so there are people that are going to, try to get things back to normal. Devin, again, she was at the gym, trying to make sure that we opened the right way, right, and put clients through it. Okay, how are we going to do this? Because clients were scared too, right? So she's there. I posted that, home with the kids, and all of a sudden, I'm getting all these notifications. And it had, like, by the end of the night, like 700 shares, 15, and I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, that's not what I wanted. I wasn't looking for the attention,
Yeah.
And then Fox News reached out.
Oh, no way.
And it was nuts, man. The next, so now it's out there. My cop buddies, everybody's calling me. Don't, just do it on the down low. We're not going to bother you. I said, that's not the point of why I'm doing it. I said, I know I can do that.
Yeah.
And then I remember one of the officers, detective, came to the gym the Friday prior, because I still went in. That was when I was writing the Panda diet. I was going in every day. I'm like, I'm not stopping what I'm doing. So I just go in. It was like a ghost town. That was so weird at night and stuff because there's nobody around.
I remember that.
That's crazy.
So I'm going in, and he comes on a Friday. I was on a call, and he's like, can you talk? I'm like, yeah. So I go outside, we talk. He goes, so, I know you're opening Monday. I said, yeah, I'm opening at 4 o'clock. I put it out there. I was like, this is when we're opening. I'm not hiding anything. He goes, so what happens when you open? I go, I assumed you guys would give me my ticket, and that was my pass for the day, and I'm going to stay open. I said, well, why, what happens? He goes, we don't know. We've never dealt with this before. So nobody knew. So I called my lawyer. I'm like, what? I said, what's the deal? And he's like, no, you get your citation, you stay open. And then I already checked with him for the staff too, because some of them want to make sure that they won't get, in trouble with the law. He said, no, it's just you that's going to be in trouble. So we did that. There was all the news vans. They closed down the parking lot, the whole thing. People came from all over the place to support. I'm blasting Ozzy Osbourne on the speakers outside, doing all this stuff. And the same day, Ian opened up in South Jersey, right? But he did it for a different reason. So we opened, get the ticket that night. I remember just being like, no idea what's going to happen. Get the ticket, and it was awesome seeing. I still have pictures, like people with flags and all this stuff. My grandfather was there, because we were on Fox that weekend. Then a bunch of interviews leading up to it. So he did the Pledge of Allegiance for us, all that stuff.
That's awesome.
And then the next day, there's less people, right? We still get my ticket. Each ticket was $1,000 fine, 6 months in jail. I remember they had asked me on, I think it was ABC, New Jersey or something, and that first day we opened, they're like, well, each day you get a $1,000 fine, 6 months in jail. How long you want to do this? I said, at least 30 days. I was like, I can do that, no problem. Again, there's the unknown. So Tuesday comes, Wednesday comes. I'm working out with my buddy Frank at the gym, because me and him knew, again, we had the same mindset about the whole thing. So we started training together every day. So I'm in the gym, it's like 6:30 in the morning, 7 o'clock. Bill Spadia reached out, I want you to come on onto the show. So middle, we're training the legs. So I go on, talk to them. Some of the cops are texting me on the side, man, we support you. We just can't say it. But that day, I have all these people calling me, my cop buddies. Today's the day they're going to arrest you. We'll pick you up. Because again, there was the unknown. Like me and Devin had no idea what was going to happen.
Were you like nervous?
Not really nervous because again, I based it all out of my values.
Right.
I wasn't doing it to hurt anybody.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
It was like I'm doing this because it's just out of a place of love. And so that day, I tell Devin, I'm like, here, Tyrone, Danny, they're all saying what they're hearing. Bridgewater, all my buddies all over the place, their cops are saying this is what they're going to do today. Also, they're going to be giving your clients tickets today, right? And that came directly from the governor. And I knew that, okay, if he does that and nobody goes in, they kind of win, right? So I remember now it's Wednesday afternoon. Frank said, why don't you go, the township prosecutor had reached out who I was friends with. He said, come see me tomorrow. It was Tuesday. So I go meet him. I'm like, do I need a lawyer? He's like, no, it's just me and you as friends. He goes, why didn't you come to me for help, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I didn't want to put this on anybody. And I'm sitting there, and he's like, my other buddy, Frank, texts, and he said, did you talk to Roy Fryman, who was a local assemblyman? He was a member, and I was friends with him. He was a member prior to that. And I said, no. So the prosecutor reaches out to Roy, gets him on the phone, and says, Roy, anything you can do here, blah, blah, blah. They're going to start ticketing his clients today. So I leave, go to the gym. I remember I was on Vince's podcast that day, so we did it on Zoom, and I opened the gym at 4, and Devin pulls in. There's nobody there. There's a few clients, but there's no hoopla or anything. Right when Devin pulls up, like 12 or 15 county sheriffs pull up, in the SUVs. They've got bulletproof vests on, they got their masks on. The whole Hillsborough Police Department, because the Wolverine's wife worked there. She's like, how they sent everybody, like it was like this national emergency. They're surrounding all the roads. So Roy shows up, and he's talking with them like, why can't you just let them train people outside? Like, what's the big deal? It's like, we've been given orders, can't let them do that.
That's insane.
Anybody that goes in is getting a ticket. And I sort of, a few people there, I said, listen, if you go in, you're going to get a ticket. So I don't know what that means for your record, but I'll pay for the ticket. I'll pay any fees you get. So like 4 people went in, right? They all got tickets. And Roy calls back around like 5:30. And he said, can you meet tonight? I said, yeah, what's up? He said, come to my office. We're going to meet, the governor essentially called a meeting. So I go in. So remember that morning, I think I'm getting arrested. I go meet him. He's like, we're going to meet with the county prosecutor, county chief of detectives. And so I don't know these guys, right? So 4 of us meet. And the county prosecutor, Mike Robertson, at the time, said, listen, because I watch your videos, because I'll be still doing my daily videos, and I'll be walking up and down the hill, just giving my thoughts on everything. And he says, I fully believe in what you're doing. He goes, this is silliness, but he goes, the governor, has a compromise. And I said, well, what is it? He said, outdoor gatherings up to 25 people, which at the time was a big deal. And I said, was that just for us or everybody, the state? He said, the whole state. And I said, all right, I'll do it.
That's
So
crazy.
it was a win.
Wow.
And then we wound up, I remember doing like a shot of whiskey. It was like such a weird
That's
turn of events that
crazy.
day, right? And it was Mexican night, so
So
I was
you
looking
had
forward
like
to that.
you like fully had not like full control, but like you were
Yeah.
completely
So
a part
then,
of that narrative.
Yeah. The next day, the county chief of detectives, because I wasn't supposed to have any contact with the prosecutor, he calls me, said, the governor's going to make the announcement Friday. Your clients won't get tickets today. You will. But just, please follow what we came up with. I said, yeah, I gave you my word. I'll do it.
That's crazy.
And then, anyway, that weekend, I spoke down at the shore with Ian. There was a big rally. And it was a Memorial Day weekend, which coming up, and I was getting ready for Colty's birthday party, and I get an unknown number of calls. Don't know who it is, so I don't pick up. And I get a text, and it was the county prosecutor. And he said, call me back. So I called him like, hey, I thought you weren't supposed to talk to me. He's like, I'm on vacation, so whatever. He said, how did it go, blah, blah, blah. Are you happy with everything? I said, yeah, man, it's great. He said, man, I told my wife, just had a lot of respect for you, and I like your message. And he gave me the inside scoop. He said the next day, the state called him and said, what's he going to do? And I said, we agreed to what we talked about. And they started saying right away, we're going to send the health department, put chains on the doors, lock them down. And Mike, he goes, this is not some stupid meathead. He goes, you gave him your word. He gave us his word. And he goes, if you guys do that, because I'm going to have the county SWAT team there to stop you guys.
That's
So it was like behind the scenes, you're all these things, right? And I was like, wow, that's freaking awesome. And then, that was kind of it, Then
Imagine we got that all on footage.
Oh, it would have been nuts, man. It would have been nuts, And it was, dealing with the repercussions after that as far as just, some people quit the business, the gym and, just
Wild times.
nuts, yeah.
Wild times.
That's crazy. But it just goes to show you when you have some type of core beliefs and you follow those core beliefs, so what could happen in life, and you've done that in just training, fitness, family, your business, and what we're doing with the PandaMan, and something that everybody could look up to and look and get some insight from.
Yeah.
And so you're someone that's always followed your mind and prove people wrong by doing studies. And if you're wrong, you'll say it. Like it's always just learning and just educating yourself, right?
Yeah,
and you apply it to yourself, and then you kind of give it to give it to the world.
Test it on myself, and see if it works.
Exactly.
I mention it to a few people. And,
hell yeah, man.
That's awesome. Well, we're definitely going to have a part 2.
Yeah, we'll have a part 2.
Because we do have a meeting today, but and we're a little late. But thank you guys for watching. You guys can find Kyle on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at the PandaMan Official. And if you're watching this, like, subscribe, and comment. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you, Kyle, for being here.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.